Good afternoon. I am Emanuele Borgonovo, and I'm very glad to welcome you here to this first of a series of BEMACS talks. And I am very glad to welcome here also my two guests. The first is David Nahamoo. David is a fellow of IBM, and he has been managing research groups all over the world with several researchers working for him, and he is currently responsible for the whole speech recognition activities of IBM. And the other guest is Professor Aassve. He's a well-known demographer, and he's the director of the Undergraduate School of Bocconi University. So I will leave first the word to Professor Aassve for a brief introduction about this series and the BEMAC course.
Thank you. Let me first say, again, very happy to take part in this series. We are at Bocconi very proud of the new Bachelor in Economics Management and Computer Science. We very much think that this is going to be the future. The aim is to have students getting very good in economics management, but also have a very strong component of computer science. And this is a feature that I believe students increasingly need when they're going to analyze economics, but also act as managers, not least because companies are becoming ever more technologically oriented. And this seems, we believe that this is the future to go, and that the Bachelor that we're presenting now is really a good one and designed for the needs of the future, what employers are going to demand in the next 5 to 10 years. And at the same time, I would like to point out that at Bocconi we are making several efforts to make developments in this direction, and of course having this series where we allow participants to understand better about where and how IT is going to influence our societies and business in the future is a great initiative. So I'm very happy to be here and answer questions.
Okay, I have first a couple of questions for all of you. Now, one of the interesting features about our guest, David, is that he has worked so much on speech recognition that since 40 years he's one of the pioneers in this field, and probably many of you are using his innovations, because his innovations are in a famous software such as Naturally Speaking, which is used by many firms and businesses, and by many people, and on the other hand, some of his software is in Siri or the telephone assistant. So every time we speak into a device, there is something that David has programmed or his research group has created for making us better interact with the machines. So with this, I would like to ask first David and then Arni, what do you think the future will look like? And let's start with the future of society, given this digitalization and the increased use of informatics, interaction, man-computer interface.
So first of all, I wanted to thank University of Bocconi to invite me to participate in this session. Second, I think what's happening in the last 50 years as IT, information technology, has come into our lives, it has made an enormous difference in the way that we live our lives, personal lives, and also in terms of what we do with respect to our businesses. Now, as we go forward, while information has influenced a lot of the things that we do in terms of businesses making decisions, I make travel arrangement. I can tell you that, for example, before IT came into being, making a travel reservation, just getting a seat on an airplane would take 7 hours to go through the process. Now today is an automatic process. So you can think of it that everything and anything in our lives these days have been influenced in a very positive way up to now. Now that we are entering the new era of cognitive computing, where a lot of the capabilities that we humans have are combined with the ability of the computers that can read, can access data in an enormous speed, I would say that the sky is the limit in terms of how our society is going to be changed. And there are a lot of industries that would be affected. There are a lot of things that we would see in terms of our health, in terms of our finances, and in terms of the way that we do our daily lives. Everything is going to become simpler and better for what we do, as I said, in business and also in life.
And Professor Aassve, you are a social scientist, so which impacts you see from digitalization on society?
It's going to be simply more and more of it, and we see the developments already now. No matter what you are going to deal with, and David mentioned several aspects there, it's going to be something that we have to relate to no matter what we're going to deal with. It might be simple things. Teaching education for our children is going to be ever more integrated, but also the way we deal with the school of our children, the way they are learning already now at age 6, they still already now use, let's say, computer technology in the learning process. And this is going to be increasing over the years to come. And for us, societies, it's going to be a case where any kind of action, any kind of decisions you would like to make, it will have to rely somehow on information technology. Then there are some concerns in the sense that you also think that, or might think that, it can create some inequality in a sense. So if those who are not able to be on top of the developments of IT might find it much more difficult to keep up compared to those it's a natural part of their education and the job and so on. Then I think that for a lot of issues such as research, business decision making, with all the data that is now available, in general, our decision making and decision, also in terms of planning, strategies, and so on, is going to be much more data-driven and empirically driven than what it is now.
Yes, sure. I think the new data-driven economy that also the European Commission has recognized in a note of July 2nd, 2014, is going to change the way in which business is done and corporations make decisions. And so working with Watson at IBM, David, I think you probably have a direct experience, direct feeling of what is happening now in business.
We are seeing that many industries are now coming to IBM, pulling the technology. In the past 2 years, when we started with the results of the Jeopardy game that made Watson and Cognitive pretty popular, we were working hard to educate the industry that there is value, but now the value is being recognized by industries, especially in finance industry. We are getting a lot of demand. We are seeing things in the health industry. We are seeing requests coming from in the education space, and we are seeing requests coming in general in the public sector and government. And I think many of these things have to do with better decision making, Many of these things have to do with the ability to automate better. Automation is at the core of many of these business requests that we have. In my own area, we are realizing that, and the enterprises are realizing that their businesses need to have a much stronger connection with their customers. We call it engagement. The engagement between the users and the service providers is completely changing. It's becoming, since we want automation, the automation also has to model after a personalized automation, something that every customer feels that they have somebody that is caring and taking care of what they want. And all of those are creating a lot of demand for the cognitive the technologies in the past year or so.
Okay, I see that there are also several questions coming up on our screens, and actually I read 3 of them concerning Watson, so I will start with them. One was if it's Watson is really capable of making online queries on a data set while you speak with the machine, and so let's hear from David.
Well, look, the problem of being able to ask a question and the system answer your question has multiple layers. Sometimes the question is a factoid question, where given that question, there are a finite number of answers, and you have to decide which answer is the right answer to that question. Sometimes these questions have a long tail of answers, which is not so easily answerable even by human experts. When you look at the problem, and we are trying to bring the technology so that it can address what we call the long tail of a query system. And more important than these things is that in almost every interaction between a user and another human being or a machine, there is no single question, single answer. It's always a conversation. It's always something that leads to something else, and there's a process behind it. Sometimes it's a problem that needs to be solved, which is I need to make a travel reservation, and there are many steps that have to be filled, and nobody would ask that question in one utterance. They usually go through many steps, and the ability for the machine to guide the user towards their goal is an important part of what these engagement systems have to do, these query systems. So the query systems are really the beginning of building sophisticated engagement capabilities for problem solving, for recommendation, for figuring out, you mentioned about policies, contracts, are a lot of things that they are not factoid questions. There's always a conversation, and we are moving in that direction. This is a journey. The journey has started, and we are making very good progress in that direction.
Okay. Then we had a question for Professor Aassve that said that in demography or data should always be big, because in numbers should be big numbers. So what's the difference between data who are big and big data? So.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. It's actually traditionally the fact is that there wasn't so much data available. In fact, the traditional demography was very much about mathematical models in order to be able to describe population processes. And then in more recent years, let's say the recent 3, 4, 5 decades, what has happened is that you have a big wave of survey data being available, and these are big data sets, and there's a lot of information there. And in other countries, you will also have register data where there is a registry of, let's say, all events or demographic events that individuals or couples make. So demography has changed in that respect because and it's moved away from having a more mathematical approach to modeling population processes to actually use the data that is available. So then that changes the methods and the way we approach it by the very fact that we can use other techniques since the data is much richer. But there is yet again another further development on that, and that is big data in the sense that the amount of collection, the amount of data that, let's say, governments or civil servant institutions are gathering is enormous. And that brings demography even a little bit further yet again. So for instance, now you can see applications where social scientists or demographers are actually using, let's say, Twitter data, to use Twitter data to do sentiment analysis, and you can map that geographically depending on where the tweets are being made. Other analysts are using data from other social media outlets, and that gives a much richer detail, much more detail in the analysis, and you are rather than being able to model, let's say, broad trends, you are now better able to make a small area, small scale analysis of that. Now, in the field of demography, it's still in its infancy, in the sense that we are still just starting to grapple with all this data that is available, but it has a huge potential, but not only for demography, of course. It's got huge potential for the rest of the social sciences. Think economics, sociology, but also public health, where if you get the methods to handle and analyze these big amount of data that is out there, it gives you a benefit in terms of being able to, let's say, understand what people prefer, what they are thinking about certain issues, and you are able to make policy responses much better targeted. So there is, in some sense, been three stages. First, the kind of the simple mathematical models. Then you have survey data. Now we are on the age of big data, and that brings about many more challenges in terms of how to analyze and how to do research into the field.
Thank you very much. There is also another interesting question that actually all of three of us will answer, which is if the word will be for number crunchers or for thinkers. And so my first answer to that question is recalling a very nice reading in 1970 paper, so 45 years ago, by John Little, who is now emeritus professor at MIT, who is a paper about the interaction between models and managers, in which basically is the same problem. So how do managers need to use models? And his answer was that managers don't actually maybe need to know the ones who actually craft the numbers, but they need to know which questions to ask numbers. And I think this is one particular issue that we will have in future education. So we will have to educate a new generation of managers and professionals that on the one hand are familiar with numbers, and on the other hand still retain the critical thinking to ask questions to numbers, because numbers don't speak by themselves. So let's see whether my two guests also agree on this respect.
Well, to the question that what is the future going to be, I think we have started moving from things that I would consider things that we memorize versus things that we analyze and we logically process. And I'm starting to see that in the younger generation, where because of the tools that they have at their disposal, things that doesn't need them to crunch the numbers, even the simplest things. They are relying on calculators more than what we used to do. But what is happening is that as part of the process is that the free time is being spent on analyzing and doing more higher level processing. So I would say that I'm answering the question from not necessarily from the business coming in, rather from technology being available to the young. By that nature, we are making our up-and-coming students young to think and calculate less. Now, with the technology, it's being emphasized in a sense that now we can do number crunching on the big data a lot more. We can summarize it in such a way where we can have at the juncture of bringing a lot of the possibilities, we're giving the people the ability and the opportunity to be able to do the last stage of synthesis, which is at least as of now, the process of synthesis among humans compared to machines is a lot stronger. So I can see that in the next 20, 25 years, it's going to be a nice marriage of machines doing a lot of the ingestion, a lot of the processing and calculation, and creating summaries, creating insights that now would require the humans to do, being for personal reason, being for business reason, to analyze these things, put them together, and draw conclusion for better outcome. And the outcome, as I said, could be in any aspect of life, of society or business.
Professor Aassve?
No, I agree with that that assessment, and I think it needs to be a bit of both. For sure, I think that the thinkers needs to have a bit of number crunching abilities as well, in the sense, or at the very least, they will need to have an understanding of what the number crunchers are doing and what the machines are doing, and the way computers and machines can help us. I think this is a skill that is going to be extremely important, and that's also the way we are trying to design our educational offer, to take on board these kind of development that I think indeed is going to happen over the next 10 to 20 years.
Okay, so I see another interesting question, which is how big data generate opportunities, and there are actually, I will mix two questions, because one is asking what are the opportunities that big data can generate for traditional companies, and together with this, the big data are an opportunity, and on the other side there can be privacy, security concerns about the use of data. So I would, I think these are very broad questions, and I would have David first trying to answer.
All right, I think your question, as you said, has two parts. Let me address the privacy. The problem of privacy always exists. It's as we are understanding that there is value for the consumption of the data, of the things that we do as a society, as individuals, as all put together, we feel that there is value, and therefore we contribute that data to these large big data analyzers. At the same time, we are concerned where we are faced with situations where we feel some things about us is now becoming more available and more readily available to others. And that concern, that dichotomy, that conflict, I don't think that would go away. I don't believe that because of privacy issues there's going to be any slowdown in the the growth and the creation of the data, not only from natural resources, which is part of the big data, but also from the human sources. We're going to continue creating data, and we have already talked about the value of it. The value is obvious in many aspects: personalized medicine, personalized support for a lot of the things that we do, the personalized education. I think it was talked about it, which is no matter what we do, the ratio of one professor to a large number of his students does not take it all the way to the benefit of each individual person. And being able to complement all the teaching education mechanism that we have with the new cognitive educators. We call them sometimes digital advisors. We call them sometimes digital tutors. These things are going to have an enormous impact. And even though these impacts are happening, and even though the fact that we have some concerns about privacy, I think we will, in my view, the benefit that we are getting out of these big data and the cognitive analysis on top of them is such that we talk about privacy, but it's not going to slow down the progress of big data as it's happening.
I agree. I think we are going to continue to have challenges coming when it comes to security and privacy, and I'm sure that today we see the frame of what the kind of big data that we have available today, and one will have to try to ensure protection and safety that way. But as David says, data is going to continue to be generated, and data is going to be generated through, let's say, governments collecting information about their citizens, but it's also going to come from social media, and it will come probably in different forms and new forms as we move along. But that said, I also think that there is already now a great awareness of this issue, and I think that at least the institutions that I deal with are always very aware and alert about the issue of personal protection and the safety of the data. Then it is true that one has to try to deal with these challenges as we go along. But at least there is a very strong awareness of it. And institutions, let's say also the European Commission, the country-specific institutions that are the keepers of big data, they are always very careful to keep the safety there. So one has to realize, or one has to recognize that this is going to remain to be a challenge, but at the very least there is a very strong and good awareness of the issue. So I'm reasonably confident that this will dealt with as one go along.
Let me add one thing, which I think you emphasized. There's a difference between security and privacy. When it gets to security, we see more attacks in different versions. The cyber security is something that is correlated with big data because there is more data available, there is more data out there, and there is possibility for, so to speak, the bad guys to abuse, misuse, and do harmful things with the data. And that is going to be a tremendous problem that we are working on. There are a lot of work going on in terms of making the data, financial data, health data, whatever that you have, more secure. And that security is an important part of what the industry is working on. The softer side of things is the privacy issues, which is a lot of things could be tracked. There is not serious harm that could be done, but there are things that would concern others. I think on that side of it, we as the society are more lenient between the privacy and the value that we are getting. At least for a long time, the value wins. The security, on the other hand, is a huge problem, and we need to, it is recognized, everybody understands it, lots of institutions and other places get affected, and that requires a lot of work, and I think a lot of work is going on in that direction.
Thank you. I don't know if we have time for one or two additional questions, but let's ask the first one, which I think could be more of a science fiction view, but some people, and because we have one of the pioneers of speech recognition, artificial intelligence, so it's a natural question. Some people view artificial intelligence taking over with machines, becoming so intelligent that they will be able to, overcome humanity. Do you think, and this opens also the question of the difference between a machine and a man. So do you think this is going to be, the horrible future of artificial intelligence, or it will be just a help for humanity?
Okay, I think the concern always is there because our imagination allows us to think all kind of possibilities. But again, I would say that in the history of mankind, the advancement of technology has always marched forward. There is no stopping it because we see value, because we are explorers, because we want to find new things and new ways. So we will continue doing those things. Is there a possibility that something drastic, awful, as you described, happen? I can't say that the probability is zero, but I think that the probability is so low and the risk versus reward is so imbalanced that, to me, the question is not that worrisome or that critical. I mean, we might think about the other side of the story in a sense that there might be ethical aspects to advancement and creation of the intelligent technologies that needs to be paid attention to as rules and laws and regulations in every stage of humanity have evolved to deal with the progress of technology. But with the idea that, hey, we are going to get into a situation where humanity is going to be at danger and machines are going to be taken over, I don't subscribe to that personally.
Thank you. I don't know if you have time for the last question. So this is out of my curiosity because we have one of the pioneers of speech recognition. So can you tell us in a nutshell, I know it's the most difficult question we can ask, the principle of speech recognition, so how can we make men communicate with the machines?
You ask, I think, many questions at the same time. The principle of a speech recognition in some sense is very simple. There is a signal, the signal has a signature, and these signatures are related to different things that we think in our head. So if you start from there and said, there's a thought that turns into that signal, if there is a relationship, which there is, between the thought and the signal, you can reverse process it always and inverse it and invert it and figure out what the thought is. And in the way of getting to the thought, it's the representation of the thought in terms of text, which is really speech recognition is all about. So in that respect, I know I simplified it enormously, but it is an inverse problem of going from signature, the sound, to the text. And since there is a forward relationship, there's always an inverse problem that can be solved. Now, you ask a different thing, which is about the man-machine interaction. Man-machine interaction goes way beyond the speech recognition. Speech recognition is just one component of it. Understanding of the language is another. Being able to interact, being able to represent knowledge by machine, codify the knowledge in machine. These are all elements of a man-machine interaction. And finally, we should mention that the man-machine interaction is not all about the logical processing things. There's a whole emotional aspect of the relationship, which is all about usability, usefulness, that come into picture, that also gets modeled and gets worked on to be able to produce useful man-machine interaction. There is an important thing that we have realized even among humans, which is success of people are less correlated to their IQ than to their interpersonal skills. You can imagine that the machines that we're building also have to have those kinds of emotional intelligence to be able to become successful, because we're looking at a society where we expect machines are going to be at least not as humankind, but to be living among us and be able to interact, being able to provide guidance, advice, answer questions, and a lot of other things. And in that respect, they need to deal with the human emotion, which is an important part of the man-machine interaction.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank both Professor Aassve and David Nahamoo for joining me, and thank you all of you for your attention, and I give you the appointment to the next BEMACS talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.